I'm now going to continue my video series on Henry Ward Beecher and his sermons by discussing Acts chapter 19. Now, what happened in Acts chapter 19? Well, we have to set the stage a little bit. We have Paul. At one time, he was known as the Pharisee Saul, okay? And then Saul had a chance encounter with Jesus on a road. And when that happened, his whole life switched around in a full 180. As a matter of fact, it was so dramatic that Saul started insisting that people call him Paul. Now, why is that? Because Saul had a Jewish name, which was Saul, and a Roman name, which was Paul. See what I mean? Okay. Now, Paul was in a place called Tyrannus. All right? He had a daytime occupation. That's right. He actually had a job. And he did his job. Okay? Did it very well. And that's how he earned his income. And then, when he wasn't doing his job, of course, he was teaching for free. Now, that wasn't necessarily the case with the other philosophers in that area at the time. Okay? You had philosophers there. Right? Now, this was like a public forum type thing. This would be like a Roman public forum. It would not be like a typical classroom like you have today. You had these Roman forums, and you had these philosophers, these teachers, and some of them you actually had to pay to listen to what they had to say. And if you didn't pay, you didn't hear what they had to say. Far different than the school systems we have today. So here Paul was, and he had a daytime job, and after that he taught his gospel for free. Why did he do that? Because he didn't want people to think he was getting compensation for teaching the gospel of Jesus. That would have been sacrilegious. Simple as that. Now, Paul had another problem. You see, there were synagogues in the area. A lot of them did not welcome Paul. Why? Because in the Jewish synagogues, they all believed that Jesus existed. They just didn't believe he was the Messiah. Paul did. Can you imagine the conflict of interest there? That's why he didn't get a chance to go to many synagogues. Now, what about churches? Well, what about the churches Paul established? Well, he hadn't established all of them yet. Another problem. See what I mean? That's why he was at the public square. Okay. Now then, at this time, some Jewish vagabonds showed up. Now, what's a vagabond? This is a person that wanders from place to place and they have no permanent home. These Jewish vagabonds showed up. And they were listening to all the philosophers, and they listened to Paul, and they knew a lot about magical incantations. Okay? What they would do is they would use spells and hexes and certain keywords and whatever, and they thought by using them, they could ward off evil spirits. Well, when they saw what Paul was doing to demonically possessed people, they thought, wow, we got ourselves a new set of magical incantations. So they carefully learned, or they thought they learned what Paul was doing. They didn't really pay attention to what Paul was really doing. Remember, Paul had a one-on-one relationship with Jesus. And that's why he could do what he did. These guys didn't. And so when they thought they had learned everything they could from Paul, they found a demonically possessed person. And they said, hey, we cast you out in the name of Jesus. You know what the demon inside that guy actually said? He says, look, he says, I know Jesus, I know Paul, but I don't know who you are. And afterwards, that demon seized that guy, and that guy then attacked these vagabonds. It was not a pretty sight. Well, anyway, the crowd contrasted what these vagabonds did with what Paul was doing. And when they saw the difference, they said, look, we don't want these magical incantation books anymore. And, of course, you know, these are papyrus scrolls. They're not really books as you and I would know them here in our Western culture. They were papyrus scrolls. So they took all these papyrus scrolls full of magical incantations, and they put it in a bonfire, and they burned them all up. You got to keep in mind, these scrolls were worth thousands of dollars in our money. Can you imagine taking a $1,000 book and just burning it? That'd be pretty dramatic. So, what's the application here? Well, let's look at the Old Testament for a second. When God wanted to cause a dramatic shift of life for the Israelites, who had been enslaved by Egypt for 400 years, He called Moses. He said, look, get these Israelites out of Egypt and bring them over here to the wilderness. And after a while, we'll clean out all of their old Egyptian thought processes and get them to think more like what I want them to think. So that's what Moses did. He went into Egypt. He brought out all the Israelites. He put them in the wilderness. And God cleaned up their minds. Because he wanted all the Egyptian influences to be removed from the Israelites. It didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. That's pretty dramatic. Okay? Now, let's go to Ezra chapter 10. And boy, I'm going to hear from the atheists on this one. Okay, let's redraw the picture of Ezra chapter 10. We have chief priests. These are Jewish chief priests. These are the ones that are supposed to be working in the temple. Okay, these are devout Jewish believers. And what they had acquired would be the equivalent of a pagan concubine. Okay, they had pagan concubines. Say, how do we know this? Because when we hear the words put away, it's not quite the same process as a formal bill of divorce. Okay? So, here was the real situation. You had these Jewish priests. They are devout Jewish men. They worshiped God. They had acquired themselves some pagan live-in lovers. Some call them wise. They may have been wise. That doesn't seem to really hold true, though, on this. Okay? Possibly they were wise. More likely they were live-in lovers. Okay? And some of these Jewish men had consummated their, quote, marriages and ended up with sons and daughters. All right. Now, can you imagine the conflict of interest that was going on here? Devout Jewish men, pagan wives, they probably had arguments every single night. Probably these women wished their husbands to die in their sleep. See what I mean? So that was what was going on here. And what happened was, at a certain point, they said, hey, look, you guys, you have got to put these women away. What that means is, they said, hey, if you don't like it here, you can go. Some of these women converted to Judaism and they stayed with their families because they loved their families more than they loved their paganism. Others were like, well, thank goodness this guy's let me out of this whole mess. Thank goodness for that. I am glad to be out of here. And these women packed their bags, they took their kids, and they went to a foreign land where they could continue their pagan worship without having to deal with this Jewish devout man anymore. See what I mean? So really, this turned out to be a kind of a good thing rather than a bad thing. Even though it sounds real bad, it really wasn't as bad as what they would like you to believe. See what I mean? So, that's called a pretty dramatic shift. So, when we're talking about a conversion here, we're talking about a dramatic conversion shift. And some people go through this kind of stuff. Some people that are former alcoholics, they won't sit there and sell off their alcohol. Well, if the alcohol wasn't good for you, why would it be good for anybody else? They'll take the bottles and they'll empty them out right on their front lawn and say, hey, look, this is what I think about alcohol now. They'll pour it right out in front of everybody so everybody can see. See what I mean? And that gives a true testament to how powerful their conversion was. It doesn't always happen that way, but in some cases it does. Now, before I end this, I wanted to say that 1 Corinthians gives a better response to being unequally yoked with an unbeliever. Gives a much better response than what was going on in the Old Testament. Remember, the Old Testament was one way. This is a little different. Okay? Usually, if the guy is really Christian, he will love his wife to such a degree that usually they'll convert over to the Jewish faith. But if they don't, and they decide to leave, the guy's not to stop them. He's not to force them out, but if they want to leave, hey, by all means. See what I mean? So either the lady in this case decides to convert to the Christian faith, or she decides that she wants to continue practicing this paganism and she can't stand this guy because he's Christian, and so she says, look, you don't have to divorce me, I'll divorce you. See what I mean? And the same thing works in reverse. If the lady's a Christian and the guy is a pagan, after a while the guy just simply won't be able to stand having a Christian around all the time, so he'll divorce her, not the other way around. She won't have to worry about a divorce, he'll just walk off. Or he'll become a Christian, one of the two. Either way, problem solved. So, anyway, like I said, that's probably what happened in Ezra chapter 10, was that the women were so glad they didn't have to deal with these Jewish priests anymore. When the priest said, hey, look, you can leave if you want. I'm not throwing you out, but hey, if you want to go, go. They were like, oh, I'm so happy for this, and they left. Guys gave them a little compensation, and they took off. So like I said, it really wasn't what people think. But when it comes to faith, when you have such a dramatic transformation, shoot, there are probably some people in this world that will take all their porn and take it to the local dump. They won't even wait for the trash guy to come. They'll just take it to the local dump themselves and say, hey, there you go, and dump it. Some people, maybe somebody has borrowed something from their neighbor for an indefinite period of time. So not only do they return the item back, but they give them something extra. See what I mean? For the inconvenience. That's pretty dramatic. Those are the kind of things you can do as a Christian. Take it one step further. See what I mean? Alright, so that was the point that was being driven home here. These people that witnessed the failure of the vagabonds to exorcise a demon, okay, this crowd that watched the failure of these vagabonds to exorcise a demon, their conversion was so dramatic that they took thousands of dollars full of magic books and put them in a bonfire and burned them up. And they didn't wait 5 or 6 days. They did it right that very same day. That's how dramatic their conversion was. So, how dramatic is your conversion? Just something to think about. I know there was a lot of stuff packed in this video and a lot of stuff to think about. But, well, you know me, I pack you full of information. I hope you learned quite a bit. If you have any comments or questions, leave them down here in the comments below. I will tell you more in a future video. Stay tuned.